Yo, what's up, y'all? Hold on, let me get straight here. There we go. Man, I'm not straight at all here. Come on now. Sorry. All right. What's up, everybody? What's up, y'all? Well, a little last minute adjustment here. I don't know what happened to my little setup. It's not straight. Okay, what's up? Let's go. So tonight we are covering something a lot different than we usually cover here at Bay's Lit Analyzer. We usually do pretty highbrow literature, right? We do everything from Shakespeare and Milton to T.S. Eliot, Yusef Kuminyaka, and Melville, etc. We've done all sorts of stuff, you guys. Go back in the little archives here. But tonight, we're going to be covering something a lot different. We're going to be going over something just pure. I don't know about fun. I mean, it is fun. It's fun. It's funny, and it's a really good book. This is a great book, but this is a pure autobiography. In fact, at the end of the book, he the author of the book that in question even says that this shouldn't be autobiography. This should be inspirational. He says, um, but yeah, tonight we're covering Will by the infamous G. Gordon Liddy. This is my paperback copy from years ago, and I reread it again today, and the last time I read this was May 7th, 2002, and I wrote, "This book is amazing, one of the best books I have ever read." So I reread it, and it's still a great book. It's not quite the same as when I read it the first time, mainly because again that was 2002. This is 20 years later, so some things have maybe some views or some things have shifted or changed, but cheers, everybody out there with my GMO Red Bull. Hope you're having a nice one. You guys, buy gold with Roslyn Capital. G. Gordon Liddy is a character, and this book is fun. It's a yarn. It's rip roaring, and he goes. I mean, it's really a pretty incredible book. So we're mainly just going to talk about the events in the book, the text, the way that the text reads. He has. I believe him when he says he has no ghostwriter. And we're going to look at Watergate, especially from the inside, because G. Gordon Liddy, is one of the plumbers. He's one of the handlers with the infamous E. Howard Hunt. Both of those guys have died. G. Gordon Liddy died not too long ago, actually. So we're gonna dive into the events of sort of an insider view of the Feds, 60s. The Feds. G. Gordon Liddy was an FBI agent. He was a lawyer. He was a talk show host. He was an actor. He was a CIA and FBI asset later on. He was an infamous political operative. And he was a pilot. He was a lot of things. This guy's a pretty amazing guy. And we're not so much going to talk about the the actual geopolitical events and the causes of Watergate so much. Like we won't be talking so much about Henry Kissinger, et cetera, or the globalist, the globalist causes behind Watergate, et cetera. We're going to be talking about it from a different perspective, and that is from the inside. And if there's one thing to say, my thesis statement about this book, Will, is that this book is a true believer. So yeah, we're gonna deep dive into this book, and it really, I don't recommend books. I'm not saying I don't say anybody should read or not read. That's part of what we do here at the channel. We're just analyzing literature, and I would call this literature. This isn't literature on the scale of Blood Meridian or Don DeLeo or something, but it doesn't have to be. We can also read fun books, and if you want to gain an insight into the modern era, especially modern America, and political operations, intelligence operations, and geopolitics through the viewpoint of a black bag man, then this is a great book to read because it's pretty revelatory. And you can debate well, we can discuss the merits of the truthfulness of a lot of this, but I have to say that, he, the way that he writes and his character, he's pretty believable. So obviously we take everything with a grain of salt when we read these books. But especially when we read books by high level intelligence operatives. But I wouldn't say this. It's interesting because you know you could say that he's high level because he's working out of the White House and doing operations specifically for the something known as CREEP, which is the infamous committee to reelect the president, right? Nixon. But in another way, I wouldn't call him a high level operative. I mean, he's working with Howard Hunt, and Howard Hunt is about as high level as you can get, as you know, if you know anything about, if you followed these things, and if you've read their books, if you follow our homies in their talks, especially Jay over at Jay's Analysis, shouts out. But in a way, he's almost a pure black bag man, right? He's a wet works division, and he states as such. So, yeah, extra raspy tonight, you guys. It's just the way it is, right? Shouts out to Rachel Wilson at Based Homeschool Mom. Shouts out to Jeff and all my homies out there. Let's dive into it. This is Will by G. Gordon Liddy, published in 1980. And I read this book in 2002. This is a copy. This is dedicated, like a lot of this book. It seems. I mean, G. Gordon Liddy is the most interesting man in the world, like in real life. R.I.P. I mean, he was. But the things that he does, that he gets up to, and that he describes in this book are so insane, or so incredible. And it starts off right away that way with the. Let me fix my old chair here. With the dedication. This book is dedicated to the memory of the Honorable Sylvester J. Liddy, RVO, K&O. They was an executive, high-level executive and lawyer, and he was knighted 3 times by the King of Sweden. So let's. So first of all, he starts off by talking about his life. I mean, the book is chronological, and he begins by talking about his. Yeah, why 3 times? Well, we're going to get into that one. It's pretty interesting. And he starts off by talking about his dad and his granddad. And his dad is a lawyer. And Liddy grows up in, I think, Hoboken, New Jersey. And he goes to a Catholic school. And that sort of sets the theme for more like 33 times. Yeah. That sets the theme for the rest of his life, really. Because of his Jesuit education, he ends up going to Fordham University, etc. Although he discusses that he was also an accomplished operatic singer, and he passed his audition at Juilliard, and also he was going to enroll in Harvard Law School. I mean, this guy he's really something. So I'm going to start off with on page 50. I'm going to skip forward some of the childhood stuff and go straight to the more interesting stuff here. Page 50. Here we go. This is great. He's a sickly boy, and he's an asthmatic, and he's got problems. But the title of the book, he learns that he has to face his fears. And he not only faces his fears, you guys, I mean, he really faces his fears. So the first thing he does is he's afraid of rats. So he goes out to the wharf with one of his friends, and his friend shows him the wharf rats. Isn't that a Dead song? Isn't that a Grateful Dead song, man? Wharf rat. So he goes out and he finds wharf rats, and then he actually kills a sewer rat. And he goes out and he cooks it and he eats it. Then he's afraid of storms. So he, especially lightning storms. So he climbs to the top of a tree with a belt on, belts himself to the top of the tree, and in a lightning storm, like with his fist in the air, kind of like Lieutenant Dan, right? He's also scared of heights, um, he gets over his fear of heights by he has a friend who is like, hey, they're in New Jersey, they're playing stickball. Hey, the local kids are playing stickball. Hey, listen, Joey, why can't you be more like your brother Tommy? Right? Your brother Tommy's got a job. You're out there playing stickball with the neighborhood kids, climbing up on the fire escapes. You're gonna get yourself killed. You're gonna give you on a heart attack, right? So he goes up on the on the rooftops, and he like jumps over the rooftops like with the huge chasm in beneath underneath him, and that's how he gets over his fear of heights. Um, then he has to get over his fear of pain, and we're gonna get to that part in a little bit. So so here we go on page 50. That Christmas, I finally got a real gun because his uncle, his mom, I think his mom's brother is in the FBI, like early FBI. He has badge number like 19, and he's like a legend in the FBI. And so one day he goes into his into the guest room, and he sees his uncle's gun, and he cocks the hammer back, and he comes out into the family room, and he says, hey, look what I got. Look, bang, bang, right? And his uncle jumps in front of the gun, and before he can actually pull the trigger, and says, okay, one day I'll get you a real gun. So here we go. That Christmas, I finally got a real gun. Not long afterward, I took the single shot bolt action Winchester 22 out in the woods after squirrels. I was startled by a shot from my left. A bullet clipped a twig from a tree inches from my head, and three more shots followed as I dropped to the ground and I tried to squirm down into it. I was furious. I jumped to my feet in defiance of instinct, and as rapidly as I could load and fire, sent 5 rounds in the direction from which the shots had come. Then listened. I heard nothing. Anger drained from me to be replaced by shame. I walked in a deep funk. So he's a young guy. He's a kid. He's not a guy. He's a kid. He's still a kid. He gets a gun. He goes out in the woods to take pot shots at squirrels. And one of the other neighborhood kids also has a real gun and shoots at him. And he fires wildly back blindly, right? He says, sometimes only one, let's see. Oh, no, here we go. For years, I'd known that I had a violent temper, and I loathed it as yet another manifestation of emotion. In the days when I was ruled by fear, the violence found release only in my dreams. I had them almost nightly. They were in color and vivid. Sometimes only one object that seemed to form the theme of the dream, a firearm or other weapon or a particular person, would be in color, the rest in black and white. Oh boy, what a dream, right? My temper represented a grave threat to me. It signified a loss of control by the reason and will and a surrender to ungovernable emotion. I felt as if there were a terrible creature within me whom I must never let escape or destroy blindly, friend, foe, and innocent bystander alike. By acting as I did, shooting without even having a target, I risked killing innocent people. So one thing that's different about this book, this is not James Joyce. We're not reading the diction of the child here. We're obviously reading the grown man applying grown adult emotions and verbiage to himself as a young lad, right? But that's okay because the honesty and the how genuine and honest he is when he talks about himself and his early childhood overrides the notion of art. I mean, we're not reading art, and we're not supposed to be. We're just reading an autobiography, right? So I appreciate that. This part's funny. He talks about how he found his wife. He says, I had another and more difficult decision to take at that time, whether to ask a certain young lady to wait for me. Because he goes off to Fordham, and then he joins the Army Reserves. And then so in his youth, the one thing that he misses is he misses World War II. He's too young to be in World War II. And like his first fear at the beginning of the book is seeing the giant dirigible flying, taking a left turn down the Hudson and like appearing over the buildings. And then he watches as the as the Hindenburg crashes, right? He like watches it and he's like horror struck. So that's like his earliest memory when he was 2 years old, is seeing all that. So then he wants to be in World War II, and he has a maid. Their house, they have a maid, and the maid is a German girl. This is like the early 30s. She's like a German girl, and she's like a big fan of a certain person, and teach and that like she really influences him. She teaches him German, and she like sort of there's this theme which I can't say on YouTube, but there's this theme throughout the rest of the book where he is enamored of certain like rituals and uniforms of a certain group of people from a certain country, and it comes to a head because when the war finally breaks out, when he's a kid, when the war breaks out, his dad, who was no fan of those people, fires the woman because they start getting mail from the German embassy to their house. Like they start getting propaganda mailings, and the maid even starts like sharing her political views. And then when Germany declares war on the United States, he feels betrayed, because it's after Pearl Harbor, right? And then he feels betrayed. And then anyway, they fire the maid, and then they get a new one, and he rebels against that. He doesn't like that. But anyway, moving on to when he's a little bit older, I had another more difficult decision to take at the time, whether to ask a certain young lady to wait for me. I was enamored of her, yet something held me back from full commitment. I had read Lindbergh. I had read Lindbergh because of my interest in aviation and was very impressed by the logic of his emphasis upon genetics in choosing Anne Morrow for his wife. The young woman was intelligent and beautiful, but I wanted more mathematical ability in the gene pool from which my children would spring. I also wanted size, height, and heavy bone structure so that my children would be physically as well as intellectually powerful. And she was of less than average height with thin, delicate bones. I felt sure I would find the woman I wanted to bear my children, a highly intelligent, tall, fair, powerfully built Teuton, whose mind worked like the latest scientific wonder, the electronic computer. I love his logic here is, I mean, look, what he's saying is actually not that, that it's not, well, I'm not going to offer any value judgments. I'm just saying that he puts everything very bluntly in this book, which is, he has a sense of humor. What he's saying is genuine and serious, but it's definitely what he says is pretty funny. So then on page 76, he passes his audition to Juilliard, but he doesn't go. Then he goes up to Cambridge to enroll at Harvard Law School, but fall was fast approaching, and I was told I would have to wait until the following year to enroll. So at the last minute, he enrolls in Fordham, where I'd gone to college. This is after college, and my father had gone to both college and law school, and they squeezed him in for the fall term. And then he makes the law review, and then he meets this woman. She's fair, 6 feet 1 inch, 200-pound Celtic physique. Since the tall, fair Celts and Teutons are so similar and were probably related in antiquity, I was an enthusiastic advocate of the match. Oh, and then her brother works for his sister's fiance works for IBM Computers. And then then he joins the Judge Advocate General's Court, the JAG Court, right? You can't handle the truth, right? You can't handle the truth, right? And you're damn right I ordered a code red. We believe in something called honor, code, right? Remember the part where Jack talks about his white shoes, his white uniform in that film? If you know what I'm talking about. Sorry, I'm kind of rambling here, but Jag reminds me of A Few Good Men. I can't tell the difference between real life and the movies, man. That's Dennis Hopper in Waterworld. Shouts out to Jay and Jamie's Waterworld stream. I love that last night. That was awesome. And also, by the way, I'm not ashamed to say I love the movie Waterworld. I saw Waterworld in the theater when it came out, and yeah, I bypass all of the ridiculous and the stupid stuff about the movie because it's such a fun movie. And I actually really like that movie. If I could, you guys, if you could have one mutant power, what would it be? Mine would be the Mariners, right? He's got gills. He can go underwater. He can breathe underwater. It's pretty cool. And also, it's got Dennis Hopper with one eye symbolism in the movie, right? And then they're on the Exxon Valdez. I can't tell the difference between real life and the movies, man. Also, the guy in Waterworld who plays Dennis Hopper's right-hand man. This is so random. I saw him in a production of Hamlet. And he was a great stage actor. He's dead now, R.I.P. But I actually really like the movie Waterworld. Plus it got Jean Triplehorn in it, right? And she was in Tom Cruise movie. She was in The Firm. Remember she was in The Firm? Anyway, whatever, I'm rambling. So while he is at JAG, and right, he's in the military, he's given a training in clandestine activities. Here we go. Page 80. Part of the course consisted in the techniques of surreptitious entry. It was given at an army base in New England where there was also a heavily guarded barbed wire surrounded installation of the ASA, Army Security Agency, a subsidiary of the NSA. When I had been trained in chemical, bacteriological, and radiological warfare, I was issued a certificate of completion, but not for this course, and I would not be surprised to learn that there was no record of my attendance. Indeed, right? So that's pretty cool. He pretty cool or pretty interesting that he gets his clandestine training while he's in JAG. He's put up for it because he is he's a really good lawyer, and he's really really good in the military. He's also a stickler for rules, and this sets the theme for the rest of the book. This guy is a true believer. Let's see. On page 83, before graduating from law school, I applied for a position as special agent at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I began the 13-week training course designed to apply maximum pressure to the candidates, as well as to educate and indoctrinate us in the procedures and standards of what was then the best and most successful law enforcement agency in the world. This part's pretty interesting. He says, the underlying theme in all our courses on law, investigation, and forensic science was always to appear to go by the book, the manual of rules and regulations, and to be able to document that appearance. Without being stated in so many words, however, the message to new agents was clear. The Bureau expected us to abide by one primary do and one overriding don't. Do succeed, get the job done. To this end, we were always to dominate the situation. Dominate any situation you're in. Shouts out to Sam Hyde. And use our initiative and resources. No matter what, however, we were always to bear in mind rule number 1, don't ever embarrass the Bureau. Page 84, a thorough and conscientious agent might run a national agency's check on his neighbors when moving into a neighborhood to learn not only what appeared on FBI files, but also in the files of the CIA, DIA, and NSA. Pretty interesting for number one, that he's writing about the NSA in 1980. Because, up until just a few years ago, right, people, at least the average normie, had no idea of the NSA. And they certainly didn't corroborate its existence. But also the fact that this guy is a true believer, and it sort of lends credibility to the fact that when he says these things, it's revelatory. He's giving us revelatory information here. He tells us we get an inside view of the FBI, especially the early to mid, I'd say the height of the Hoover years of the FBI, from Liddy, that we don't really get many other places. And we believe him because he is so sincere in what he says, and his criticisms aren't criticisms to him. They are obviously moral quandaries and are an indictment of the credibility of them, especially now. But they aren't for the author here. He says, suppose an instructor was asked in one of our classes, an agent requests bank records of a subject of investigation where a subpoena can't be obtained and the bank refuses. What should he do? One acts as a con man, came the answer. One uses one's initiative and resourcefulness to get those records. Of course, it goes without saying that in doing so, one exercises good judgment at all times so as never to embarrass the Bureau. In other words, they lie, cheat, and steal in order to get the job done. And he says specifically, right, the ends justify the means in his view throughout this thing. He goes on to talk about on page 86 the Hoover personality cult. Associate Director Clyde Tolson, himself a former clerk, and how he was taught by this guy named Big George Zeiss, who is a 6'7" tall dude, 300 pounds, in the art of how to kill a man. Not only with automatic weapons and semi-automatic weapons and all firearms, but also to all sorts of objects, objects at hand, which is Jay's covered this right in the CIA manuals. But this is FBI, and especially in the use of a pencil. He mentions that a number of times. In fact, later on, after serves his prison time, they take him out for Watergate. They take him out. He goes to the White House, and he's unintentionally put into a room with John Dean, White House aide John Dean, right? And Nixon aide, and the only thing on the desk is a pencil, and he's unaware whether he's received assassination orders or not. And he considers taking the pencil and jamming it into his brain. Instruction was given on the grounds of the Marine Corps base at Quantico, Virginia. Let's see. Then he's stationed in Oklahoma. He becomes a full agent, and he's stationed in Oklahoma. Page, which sounds lame, but I think it sounds kind of cool because he's in Oklahoma, right? But he's not in New York or whatever. But when he goes to Oklahoma, he's a firearm. He loves guns. He prides himself on how good he is with a gun, right? But when he's there, he meets these two guys. It's a pretty interesting part. He meets these two guys who are like special agents, and they're both these old timey like actual cowboys. And he's shooting at the range, and the guy, they sort of take him in, and they're like, "You're pretty good, but you want to know how to be a good shot." And they teach him how to quick draw, how to manipulate his own weapon to make it suitable. They show him how to make a holster. They give him a 357 to carry, and basically they give him some rules for how to handle a firearm in a real sense beyond what he learned at Quantico. One of the things that he's taught is to never take never do like warning shots or wounding shots, right? Because it's that old adage of if you're going to draw it, you have to be prepared for what's coming as well, is pretty much what they say. I can't read it on the stream, but I'm trying to do my best with the algo, you guys. On page 108, in security cases, the black bag job, so called after the valise in which entry tools had been carried in the early days of the program during the Roosevelt administration, could range over a wide variety of cases. It could be a complex, surreptitious entry into an embassy, a friend or foe in Washington after surveillance determined that all personnel were off the premises, so experts could open the safe in a manner not detectable and remove for copying one-time cipher pads and similar materials. Or it could be what I would do in a criminal case. The former operations were done only after Bureau headquarters had evaluated the feasibility study and given the go-ahead. Most were done for the NSA. The CIA provided the same service overseas, he says, and were deadly serious. Were an embassy employee to return before schedule, and there was danger that he would arrive before the agents could get out, he would be mugged on the street by strong-arm men, often those assigned to the Bureau's baseball team, and our government would apologize to his government for the inability of the Metropolitan Police Department to control street crime in the nation's capital. We've actually seen this, right? We've seen this a few times in the recent past with government employees especially of certain during certain people's presidential runs or Secretary of State, etc., who have been mugged suspiciously on the street. And this really gives you an insight into the fact that he is it provides cover for the fact that somebody's breaking into an embassy, etc., or a building, surreptitious entry, and that it's a cover for them being discovered, right? Let's see. There was a similar operation in the field that was supposed to be undertaken only after the Bureau had weighed the matter and decided. For those situations, there was a code phrase. If the submission of the plan for the Bureau approved contained the words security guaranteed, it meant we did it last night and got away clean. Approve it so we can send you the results officially. Finally, there was the SI, the security index. This ties into the Americans, which Jay has covered extensively. The show, The Americans. If anybody hasn't seen The Americans, you should watch The Americans. Great show. And this is what it's describing here: the security index. Remember Jay and Mark Hackard also. Mark, shouts out to Mark Hackard. Covered this. This was a list of those individuals, citizen or alien, whom the FBI believed dangerous to have at large in the event of a war or major confrontation with the Soviet Union. There was, of course, an extensive file on each. And it says, in case a war actually did break out, they would go through the list of names on the security index. They would process them out to all of the various arms of the Bureau, and that they would round them up, and they would then be sent to concentration camps until the danger was deemed to have passed, much as U.S. citizens of Japanese ancestry were interned during World War II. And the first time he saw a security file was on the novelist Nelson Algren, who did The Man with the Golden Arm. If you guys haven't seen that, there's a movie version with Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra is a heroin addict. The Man with the Golden Arm. And I thought someone was kidding, but it turned out to be another example of the consequence of making FBI agents out of bureau clerks, because he sees in the file that Nelson Algren is living on the shores of Lake Michigan, and also living there at the time is Simone de Beauvoir, who, remember, was the wife partner of Jean-Paul Sartre. But the bureau clerks, the FBI agents, either come from law school or they're basically like they're accountants, and they come from this university. I think it's Southeastern University, which is specifically an FBI front. And basically everybody who goes there goes into the FBI. And the people that become just clerks, they're unaware that Simone de Beauvoir is first of all a woman. It's not Simon, it's Simone, and that she's living there with Nelson Algren. And so they think that Nelson Algren is there in drag. He probably actually was anyway, right? But they confuse the two of them. They think it's an alias. So Liddy often will talk about the incompetence of people within these agencies and bureaus. Let's see. He meets Hoover. He meets Hoover for the first time and is given special agent status. And Hoover promotes him, and he describes Hoover's office and the cult of personality that surrounds him, all the buttons, how he has a lift behind his desk, and like the ritual they're supposed to go through when they meet Hoover. and how there's a story about how Bobby Kennedy and Hoover hated each other, and they would do these little things to get at one another. And Bobby Kennedy's office was across the street across the hall from Hoover, on the same level, the same office building. And Bobby Kennedy got at Hoover by like bringing his dog into work every day. Hoover hated dogs and was like allergic. And then he learned, of course, he had files on Kennedy. And then he learned that one of the things he learned was that Kennedy loved working out. So there was a gym in the basement of the building. So he had armed guards posted at the gym and said FBI personnel only, and they blocked Bobby Kennedy from the gym. Let's see. Page 133. Hoover was able to, blackmail operations. Hoover was able to, shouts out to base homeschool mom. I'm living on the shores of Lake Michigan. Simone de Beauvoir is my nemesis. Hoover was able to make things like that stick because of the extensive files he had on anyone with political power. The synopsis files on every senator and congressman were kept in an office a few doors down from mine. I used them in my work. Okay, so we all know this is the case. I mean, this is, even normies know this, right? About the files that Hoover had on every, anyone of consequence in the U.S. government. And it was a blackmail operation that he learned partly from the mob. We already know that. We know that Cone did this, right? Learned it from the mob. This went on to Jeff Stein Effrey and black, contemporary blackmail operations. But one thing we don't usually get is like an insider view. It's plainly spoken insider view of what these files are and what they mean. So here we go. It was common knowledge that the Kennedys were powerless against Hoover because JFK's extensive pre and extramarital sexual activity was thoroughly documented in the sensitive files kept by Miss Gandy. The first entry in JFK's file noted an espionage surveillance operation of a young naval officer leaving the apartment of the target's mistress by the back door as the target came in front. When the officer was identified, it was reported to Hoover, who informed Joseph Kennedy of the potentially embarrassing situation. Joseph Kennedy's the ambassador, remember. The ambassador had Franklin Roosevelt see to it that the Navy transferred his son out of Washington. Nor were those files limited to politicians or to writings. Anyone with any kind of power or national celebrity was represented, and the quality of detail was remarkable. In the tape I reviewed of the lovemaking between the late Sam Mooney Giancana and a well-known popular singer, even the squeak of the bed springs was audible. As we said at the time, in a takeoff on an old joke about Hopalong Cassidy, nobody fucks with J. Edgar. And then he comes. So that's pretty interesting, right? That they were trailing a target for espionage, and then they that led them to a woman, and then they put a tail on her, and then they happened to catch John F. Kennedy walking out of this woman's place after a tryst, and then Joseph Kennedy had him removed from Washington. It's pretty interesting. He comes home and his wife has already had like 3 kids. They've had like 3 or 4 kids, and yes, Hoover was a cross-dresser, of course. And he doesn't. So that's one thing. Like allegedly, folks. Liddy doesn't go into details like where he's speculating on Hoover himself. He's only talking about like what he's seen, and I think that's one interesting thing about the book. And like when he talks about Clyde Tolson, right? Clyde Tolson was J. Edgar Hoover's right-hand man. He was the second most powerful man in the FBI. He knows that if he's to rise in the FBI, he'll never get above assistant director, which is Clyde Tolson. He'll only get to 3rd in command. But he doesn't speculate or make any commentary on Clyde Tolson being his obvious lover, right? He comes home and his wife is smashing her head repeatedly against the door frame, saying, "I'm so tired." Let's see. Page 135. Just like totally kind of in the course of conversation, he says he drops some bombs here. He says, by the spring of 1962, I was getting restive at work. I was aware that a large measure of the success of the Bureau was attributable to the astonishing degree of his acceptance by the American people and the cooperation that engendered. I knew I was doing important work in furthering the reputation of the FBI and helping to defeat its critics in what was a part of the COINTELPRO operation. It just happens to drop the fact that he's working COINTELPRO, right? He says on page 136, here's about his father, Jason. That's right. He says, my father must have been psychic. He'd always hoped that I would join the law firm. His father has a Wall Street law firm by this point. And having just enlarged it and moved to new offices in the Wall Street area, he made his move, offering me a $2,000 raise to come aboard as an associate. This is in the 50s. Things were booming. Marathon Oil was part of a consortium that had brought in the new oil fields in Libya and wanted to get into the retail market in Europe as well as to expand in the United States. The new M Marathon trademark would have to be registered all over the world. I told my father I'd talk it over with Fran and let him know. So that's why his dad is high level. His dad, has this law firm, and then he moves to Wall Street. It gets bigger, and now he has accounts dealing with foreign oil, including Libya. He on page 137 he mentions Second Vatican Council and how he has problems with his Catholicism. On page 138 and 139, he's an idiot. He goes in this part. He talks about how, he's trained in logic, and that leads him to believe basically in this ecumenism. But many religions, including Hebrew, Christian, and Islamic, claim that distinction for themselves. That so he loses his faith here, and he talks about how he doesn't believe in God anymore because of his logic. God needs to listen to Jay, right? But by the end of the book, though, he seems to have found his faith again. I mean, the last words in the book are, thank God that this has happened, and that he's been able to live this life. Page 141, he talks about the French Foreign Legion and the Waffen SS. His dad is, because he's talking about Vietnam and how he's obviously, Gordon Liddy is obviously pro Vietnam. He's pro domination in Vietnam. But he doesn't talk about, obviously, like we said, this guy's a true believer, and he doesn't go into any of the things that Vietnam actually was. He doesn't go into, it was this cringe atheist phase. Yeah, for sure. And he doesn't go into, what the morality of Vietnam or the various geopolitical or strategic interests. He super cut with all the Red Bull cups. Oh no. He only talks about how, we're there, so they need to dominate. Let's see. Okay, so he's in the FBI, and then here we go, page 147. Much of my work in the drug abuse area was grim. Then I met Timothy Leary. So he's appointed to handle, this is before the DEA, and he's appointed to handle like drug smuggling and drug busts. And then he leads a raid. Did you know that G. Gordon Liddy led the raid when he was the he gets out of the FBI, and then he works for his father, and then he becomes like the DA in New York. And did you know that G. Gordon Liddy is the one who led the raid on the Millbrook estate, where Leary was arrested? You remember DPH, Church of the Eternal Logos, and his streams on Timothy Leary and the videos showing Millbrook? Well, remember when they were busted? That was Liddy that led that raid. Let's see. He gets intelligence that Leary's going to be at Millbrook with all these people. He thinks it's like a cult, and they're out there doing acid and all this stuff. And then he basically leads the raid. He gets there, and Leary's wife has like this urn with these ashes and acid and stuff in it. She says, "Oh, my sacrament," which, and then and when they get there, Leary's like all calm, and he's like has no pants on, and they spend the rest of the time like, get this man some pants. He plays good cop, bad cop, basically with one of the young guys that they find there. And the kid says, "Oh no, I'm in so much trouble." And he's like, "Why?" And he's like, "Well, my dad is the head of U.S. Steel." Oops. Right. So he basically lets him go. Let's see. He moves back to Washington. I didn't know then that 14th Street Northwest is Washington's red light district, riot corridor, and heroin heaven all rolled into one. I found out. So he walks out of his house, and he like sees somebody getting mugged, so he chases the muggers all the way into the city, and he like then he's like surrounded by a group of people, and he knocks one of them out, but then he gets like beat up, and they break his arm and stuff. It's one instance where I guess he wasn't armed. He's always armed every other time. Okay, on page. Let's see. Page 180. He goes to work in Washington for the Treasury Department, and he goes in there, and this is after he gets mugged, and he's trying to see in DC. Oh, that's it. In DC, he can't carry a firearm because he works for Treasury, and he's not allowed within the city limits of DC to carry. He's not authorized to carry a legal firearm. So then he goes to Treasury, and he has himself basically appointed. And this is what happens. This is the process. What happens? The credentials said nothing about firearms, but it was so impressive looking, nobody would challenge it. These credentials and badges were phony. They were for the use of the CIA. Everyone knew that the Treasury had many different law enforcement agents of one kind or another, but few knew or cared what they actually were. This made Treasury agent an ideal cover for CIA officers operating within the United States. The Treasury, on request of the CIA, would make up a credential and issue a gold badge in any name desired to any photograph supplied. I promptly had my photograph, name, and title made up into one of the credential sets and were equipped to carry a gun anywhere in the United States. The Lord helps those who help themselves. So he uses a CIA Treasury cover that the CIA often uses to make himself to appoint himself to a certain role, so that then he's authorized to carry a firearm. Let's see. He then goes into he's part of a Treasury Department program looking at the opium crop, the opium production in Mexico, that's and the smuggling coming into the United States. And he basically says, "Oh, we can. I know how to solve this. Let's just drop all the let's just chemical bomb all the poppy farms in Mexico." The task force is impressed with the potential effectiveness of a chemical crop destruction utilizing aircraft. Right there was the genesis of the Paraquat program. It's so, he just drops this shit in here. It's crazy, right? This becomes Operation Intercept, right? He also talks about one of his memoranda is the genesis of the DEA, right? As an independent agency. Okay, on page 200, we start getting into the Pentagon Papers and Daniel Ellsberg. So this guy's done it all, you guys. So on page 200, we get into one thing that I think that a lot of people who are interested in this are often confused about. I mean, it's easy to confuse, and that is people confuse Daniel Ellsberg with the Watergate break-in. Now, they all kind of go under the metonym Watergate, right? It's all sort of that term is all encompassing in terms of the shenanigans of the Nixon administration, et cetera. But Ellsberg is actually a different operation than the Watergate break-in. Remember, Ellsberg is the guy who's talking to his psychiatrist. They're going to break into his psychiatrist's office to take the files to reveal what they have about Nixon and all these other people, and that's the Pentagon Papers. Because I think Ellsberg works for Rand Corporation. At one point, they discuss breaking into Rand Corporation, and then they break into Brookings Institute, and so he's the leaker, right? That the New York Times, the Mockingbird New York Times publishes in the Pentagon Papers, and but that's different from the Watergate break-in, which was at the behest of this guy Jeb Magruder, who was trying to get the intelligence on what the Democratic convention organization had on the Nixon administration, sort of a counterintelligence operation. But it all goes under one aegis, right? So it says, page 200, the New York Times on June 13th had published what it was dubbed the Pentagon Papers, and it greatly upset the president, and an intensive investigation of the man believed responsible, Daniel Ellsberg, was being conducted by the Department of Defense, Justice, and FBI. And what's interesting, you guys, is that the FBI and the CIA are sort of at loggerheads, at least on the surface, because he talks about how Hoover had stopped all communication with the CIA. And that's probably true to a big extent, right? That they were rivals. But he also we just read where he mentioned that the CIA works domestically, right? That the CIA only works internationally, right? It doesn't work domestically. That's the FBI. No, and the FBI works internationally. We know that. There's no real balance. And also, it's interesting that his co-conspirator in Watergate is Howard Hunt, who is ex-CIA, right? There's no ex-CIA. And that they're doing all this stuff with agency help. All of the break-ins are with agency help. And so obviously the Pentagon Papers is either, it's a controlled leak, right? Or a limited hangout. Hold on, somebody just dropped a Venmo. Let's see. Somebody dropped a little fat super chat here. Yeah, you guys, thank you. Make sure that you like the stream here. Smash that like button. Oh, here we go. Rachel Wilson, based homeschool mom, our homegirl here. Another great stream. What an awesome channel. Do you ever wish you had started it sooner? Good question, Rachel. I appreciate that question. I'd say honestly, no. I don't, because I think when I started this was exactly the right time to start it. I mean, who knows? Who knows? Looking back in the past, where we could be by now. But there's when I think about it that way, I can't really. I don't know. It's you can't go back, right? You can't speculate. And I think that this time in my life and in the life of the things that are happening, I think this was a good right time to do it. And in fact, again, I got to thank my homeboys, Jethro and Jerry at Exposing Powerful Lies live streams, who really pushed me to go ahead and get the channel started. I mean, they really pushed me to do that. And I'm so thankful that they did, because this is great. This is fun. I'm having fun. This is fun, right, you guys? And, we've got all the time in the future to go over stuff as it comes. And I think that everything that we've done so far has sort of led on to the next thing, right? And we talk about intertextuality and how things relate. I mean, I think the most fun example I had of that, or probably the best example, is when I did that Julius Caesar stream talking about Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. And then that night, Lindsey Graham went on TV and said, "Listen, we need to just do something about that. Aren't there any old Brutuses over there in that country who can take care of that old mean, nasty old man Putin? Somebody needs to do a Julius Caesar." Remember, he did that night. So, yeah, I appreciate the super chat. Thank you so much, Rachel. Love you as always. You guys, if you're watching this, especially later, buy her book. Go on Amazon and buy her book, Cult Roots of Feminism. And we are definitely happy and blessed to know Rachel. So let's see. Page 201, he talks about the SALT talks. SALT obviously ties in with, remember the movie SALT about what's her name? Angelina Jolie as a CIA MK Beta sex kitten / MK Delta Sparrow double agent, right? It's actually a pretty good movie, or at least pretty revelatory, right? And CFR Angelina Jolie, right? But this is the SALT talks between the Soviet Union and the United States and the nuclear treaties, and how the Pentagon Papers were leaked to the Soviet embassy. Apparently still, if you work in DC and you are, like, let's say, a lawyer, and you need to get information on like a traffic violation or something that happens to occur, actually happens to occur, like on Embassy Row or right in front of an embassy, or right in front of like the Russian embassy, and you need to get proof that it occurred. All you have to do is ask the embassy, and they'll provide you with detailed videotapes. Is what I've heard, because it's all surveilled. Liddy goes on to describe the opposite. How he admits that yes, all embassies are wiretapped by the CIA and NSA and FBI. That's obvious. Everybody knows that. He goes to, let's see, when the Pentagon Papers happen. It says, on July 24th, President Nixon conferred with John Ehrlichman and Bud Crow about the devastating problem of leakage to the press of the highest classifications of national security information. Crow came from the meeting shaken, and soon afterwards spoke to me. The president, Crow said, was absolutely furious, as was Henry Kissinger, about the deliberate leaks. He and Young were to orchestrate a government-wide search to find the leakers and root them out. So this is the start of Watergate, because they appoint Liddy to find the leakers. They give him special access at the White House and files, classified files. And that's how he's supposed to root out the leakers. And that's how they find Ellsberg. Page 202. He gets, he says, he gets an object in his office, which is a scrambling device. The object was not a safe, but it did indeed have a combination lock. Only Secret Service had the combination. Each day, an agent opened it and inserted it into the mechanism, an IBM card bearing the day's code. The phone was a KYX scrambler, and over it, we could speak securely to any U.S. installation of significance in the world. We used it mostly to talk to the CIA at Langley. Cooperation between White House and Langley, right here. Says, again, more on page 202. On the ceiling was a small half hemisphere that, when activated, projected ultrasonic waves throughout the area. If a mouse so much as stirred in the room at night, the Secret Service came running. That's their security device. Let's see. CIA came over to give us the highest clearances and take our oaths not to compromise them. One, for example, was so high that just the first letter of the identifying code word was classified secret, while the word itself was top secret and the information protected on a need-to-know basis. I was briefed on Project Jennifer, the attempt by means of the Glomar Explorer to raise the Soviet submarine sunk in the Pacific. So he's name-dropping Howard Hughes here. The Glomar Explorer, you guys probably know this, but the Glomar Explorer was a project by Howard Hughes. Remember Howard Hughes's top lieutenant, what was his name? I forget his top lieutenant's name, but he was a CIA guy. And when the Soviet Union submarine sank and they had all those sailors and they were on the ocean floor, the CIA and the U.S. government made a real effort to capture the submarine so they could get all the intel. And finally they turned to Howard Hughes, who created this thing called the Glomar Explorer, which I think is still in use. It's a gigantic ship, which especially at the time had been outfitted with the latest in sonar and, high tech stuff. And basically it's like a submarine. It's a submarine swallowing submarine. And the object of the mission was to go down and, like, the Glomar Explorer goes on the surface, the submarine's down here, and it sends a thing down and it swallows up the submarine and takes it up. But I think the Glomar is still in use. Let's see. It's the only thing I can reveal to this day because it's already blown, but my clearance included the high technology satellite intelligence systems in matters of similar seriousness. I received them because my work on the new project required access to the Pentagon files. He organizes his rooting out mission to find Ellsberg and the leakers under the codename Odessa. Remember, Operation Odessa is the name of the post-war rat line operation, which moved Mengele, etc., from Germany to South America, right? Klaus Barbie was Operation Odessa, right? And it's different from Paperclip. Paperclip was the operation that moved the scientists and, Werner von Braun and those guys over to America. This was the rat line that moved them down to South America into Paraguay, Brazil, Argentina, to Peron, and later to Chile with Pinochet. But interestingly enough, they all ended up pretty much working for CIA because of their anti-Soviet experience, right? Especially Klaus Barbie, the Butcher of Lyon. Let's see, page 204. He meets Howard Hunt. Let's see. He owes his position to John Mitchell, and the only other power not represented was Charles Colson. And Charles Colson is the sometimes called the second most powerful man in the Nixon administration. Right. He is the White House chief of staff. Was that Colson? That was Colson, right? There's Colson, Ehrlichman, John Dean. There's all these there's this huge cast of nefarious characters, right? And let's see. I walked out and was introduced to Howard Hunt, page 204. E. Howard Hunt presented himself as a consultant working for Charles Colson, sent down to room 16 to review whatever we had available on Ellsberg. So he's a consultant. He's a consultant who is appointed by Charles Colson to help out with this rooting out operation. But he's actually a CIA operative working on. My feeling is that he is a CIA operative working in the Nixon administration as a consultant, who is controlling the operation and controlling the opposition. In other words, he's not only there to root out the guys, but he's there to make sure that the guys that they root out are the right guys. Does that make sense? Hunt was about my size, 12 years old. What's E. Howard Hunt's autobiography called? It's pretty good, you guys. I forget what it's called, but it's pretty good. And of course, Tom Coombs in Mission Impossible, Agent Hunt, right, is named for E. Howard Hunt. Hunt was about my size, 12 years older, and a brief conversation revealed two things about him. He was knowledgeable in the area of intelligence operations and had a command of the English languge one associates with brains and a first-class education. Well, because he's CIA, right? He's one of the old boy network. I had heard of him from Bud Crow, and after conversation, confirmed his expertise in the field of intelligence. I accepted him. Let's see. His wife became lonelier and lonelier on weekends. The leak problem was still a top priority, but I also worked on firearms and heroin matters. Of course, he's working on heroin matters. There's a part of this book where, oh, here it is. It's with talking about Richard Helms. The drug problem entailed meetings with state and CIA. State, remembering well my comments about the ambassador and the Luger, was particularly unhappy to see me, and I pressed CIA on the problem of the Golden Triangle area of Burma. And this comes out in Alfred McCoy's The Politics of Heroin, one of the great books in essentially the globalist book series, right? It's the book, the tome on the Golden Triangle and all of the CIA operations and the drug running, and includes elements of Phoenix Program. You guys got to read that book. Richard Helms, here we go. Richard Helms pointed out quite correctly that the area was under the control of local warlords in Burma, right? Kun Sa. Kun Sa is the guy who he was a Kuomintang operative who was made his name under Chiang Kai-shek. And when Chiang Kai-shek moved to Taiwan, in the news now, right? Kun Sa and his Montagnard Burmese CIA-funded mountain men paramilitaries went up into the mountains of Burma and basically enhanced and started the Golden Triangle operation, which was shipping heroin via Air America, funding black operations, right? And it's interesting that Richard Helms says the local warlords are not responsible to central government, and it would be futile to lean on Burma. When asked if we could send in clandestine forces to defeat the drug warlords who were running the opium trade, Helms said that would be impractical given the assets at our disposal and what it would take. These are very tough people who know that country does no one else. You send people in there, and the most likely thing to happen is that they'll just disappear. When asked what could be done, he said, we could rough them up a bit, say from the air, but I don't believe that was ever approved. And if it was, and we did it, it was closely held. So do you get the irony here? See, Liddy either doesn't know, or he's not saying, or we only know with the benefit of hindsight, even though McCoy's book was published before the publication of this book, that Helms, when he meets with Helms about the opium problem in the Golden Triangle, and he suggests going in there and taking out Kun Sa and the warlords, of course, Helms is going to say no, because Helms is running the operation, right? It's a CIA operation. I mean, that's confirmed now, right? So of course he's going to say that, right? Lansdale's not going to like that. Then he finds Liddy sees documents on the assassination of DM, who was the leader of South Vietnam, a puppet CIA guy who was then replaced, right? And he says the Nixon administration believed that John F. Kennedy had ordered DM slain. I don't think that's true. Maybe the Nixon administration, in terms of Helms and the CIA, because Alan Dulles talks about that in the book The Devil's Chessboard, and in The Ghosts of Langley, that other book, The Ghost of Langley, they both discuss how Helms and the CIA were responsible for that operation, and Kennedy was devastated to learn of the assassination of DM. So it happened under Kennedy, but I don't think if he approved the operation, I'm sure it was unknowingly, or maybe it wasn't. Who knows? Let's see. At the same time, Hunt was trying to find the same kind of cable by going through traffic at state. They're trying to find cables relating to that prove the assassination of DM was approved through U.S. government channels, and Howard Hunt is the one helping him on this hunt, and he says he too determined that the key cables were missing. Well, it's pretty convenient that Howard Hunt is the guy who's helping him find the missing cables on DM, when Howard Hunt is probably the guy who went in there to find the cables and then removed them and then said, "Oh, I can't find them." So he says he can't prove anything about the murder of DM. Let's see. He talks about working for a domestic intelligence division. He says on page 207, the wife of a government employee and nurse was said to be giving Hoover massive injections of some substance to keep him going. Meth. He's being given injections of meth from Dr. Feelgood, right? We talked about Kennedy and Khrushchev were both clients of Dr. Feelgood at the same time. So was Hoover, supposedly. Here we go with FALSE, FLAG operations on page 208. Typical was the time when the governor of a southern state refused to cooperate in the investigation of a UXAN infiltration, the UXAN infiltration of his own state troopers. After the FBI burned a cross on the governor's lawn, the outraged governor cooperated with the Bureau forthwith. Alas, those days were no more. He just confirmed that, right? They're doing, well, we can't say what they're doing now or what they're not doing now, but you know what I'm talking about, right? The shenanigans of the Glowies, and they, of course, do a FF operation, right, to coerce the governor into making a decision. Crazy stuff, huh? Let's see. He thought of on page 218. Liddy comes up with the idea of doing a black bag operation on Ellsberg and his offices. And let's see. Page 219. There's a memo on Rand Corporation malpractices. With respect to the McNamara study, Rand, on the initiative of its president, Harry Rowan, chose not to follow certain of the regulations governing the care and custody of top secret material. For example, certain top secret documents were deliberately not entered into the top secret document accountability system. This was in violation of the 18th month rule. Over 600 Rand affiliated persons retain top secret clearances, whereas only 6 qualify under the rule. Other evidences of Rand supervening pertinent security regulations and is characterized by Bernhardt lying to DOD representatives in an attempt to cover up has persuaded him to conduct a personal investigation at Rand Santa Monica. So they're looking into Rand Corporation for the leaks. So then he gets with Howard Hunt, and they of course they need some other guys for this black bag operation, Wet Works division, and they turn to the Cubans. And the Cubans are probably the most interesting characters in this book, even though they're not really described that much. The real life Cubans are by far, I mean, they're really a great book on Cuban operations and anti-Castro operations is the book. Can you guys see that? I don't want to do a soy jack face. It's Take That, Mr. Putin. Is American Desperado by John Roberts and Evan Wright, which is about the, what do you call it? The what's the name of the guy? It's about anti-Castro operations in the drug trade, especially going in the 80s, and the ties between mafia and CIA with Escobar. Anyway, Anyway, the Cubans turned out to be fine men. There was Bernard Barker, who had dual nationality. These guys are all 20. What do they call 2506? Is that the brigade? What's the Bay of Pigs brigade? Is it 2506? There was Bernard Barker, who had dual nationality, spoke excellent English, and had survived 18 months in a Nazi prison camp. Felipe de Diego, a handsome businessman and Bay of Pigs veteran, and Eugenio Martinez, powerfully built veteran of many dangerous secret missions into Castro's Cuba of the CIA. Eventually, they take on a few other guys, and they are the most notorious one. Frank Sturgis, especially, is really fun to read about. Fun to read about because he is probably actually the most interesting man in the world. You know, he and Hunt were supposedly two of the tramps at the JFK event. And Frank Sturgis is involved in like all sorts of black operations with the CIA. One of these anti-Castro guys. You can still see there's an interview. It might be with William F. Buckley, but it's Frank Sturgis talking about operations still on YouTube. It's like one of his only interviews. On page 270, Liddy says, Bud, if you want anyone killed, just let me know. He smiled and said, I will. I reacted to his smile by saying, I'm serious. Then he puts together this thing called Operation Gemstone, which is a series of, this takes him a bulk of the book because he and Howard Hunt have hired these Cubans because they are working for the intelligence arm of the CREEP, which is the Committee to Re-elect the President, right? And Nixon has, there's layers that protect Nixon, but it's essentially a Nixon operation. And that's what a lot of the Nixon recordings were about, the tapes, right? Remember the Nixon tapes and the missing tapes? It's not just Nixon saying the sea sucker word like a million times. If you've ever seen Oliver Stone's Nixon. But it's also Nixon talking about some of the operations that were trying to, they were black bag operations, break-ins, essentially stuff that Liddy and the Plumbers were doing. And that's why they hired the Cubans to do it, right? And he's tasked with coming up with the stuff for Coulson and Dean under a series of different code names under the Gemstone Aegis, which is like there's Operation Topaz, Operation Diamond, Operation Coal, and they essentially mimic like classic CIA operations, almost MK Ultra level operations. There's a honeypot that they go through, or a honey trap rather. They employ an MK Beta sex kitten. They do all this stuff because he's promised a $500,000 budget to start with, and then it's going to increase to $1 million. But as you can guess, the budget dwindles and they never get that much money approved. But the money that they have is all accounted for and tracked, which later serves to condemn them when the Watergate hearings take place. He talks about Howard Hughes again. Howard Hughes, he meets with Howard Hughes's people to do some break-ins, and essentially they're going to break into some offices in Santa Monica and in LA. And let's see, this was an alliance of convenience with Howard Hughes, known to be an enemy of Greenspun, who is this Hank Greenspun, who is a Las Vegas newspaper publisher who wants to blow Muskie out of the water. And they're supposed to go in and break into this office, and they're going to get assistance from Howard Hughes through his guys, because they can accomplish two birds with one stone, because the guy has information on Howard Hughes, but eventually it doesn't work out because he realizes that Howard Hughes probably aborts the operation because there's probably some blackmail material that he doesn't want Hunt and Liddy to find, because they represent the government, right? And Howard Hughes doesn't want the government having anything on him, even though they go through the whole plans for the operation. And they're gonna steal the stuff, crack the safe, and they're gonna take it to one of his Caribbean locations. Let's see, but it doesn't go through. Okay, on page 288, we get who I suspect is either like Sidney Gottlieb himself or Louis Jolyon West. or one of those guys. Maybe it's the Dr. Green that is discussed in you remember the hearings with not Kathy O'Brien, but one of the other one of the other girls who was a monarch, right? And she's discussing how she had all these things happen to her in her monarch mind programming from a Dr. Green. I mean, who is that? Would that be Martin Orr? It might be Martin Orr. But this guy goes under the name Dr. Gunn. And let's see, it says they meet with this, he and Howard Hunt meet with the CIA guy, Dr. Gunn. And let's see, this guy, it says, okay, here, page 286. On a brisk February day, shortly thereafter, Howard Hunt and I had lunch with a man he introduced to me as Dr. Edward Gunn, a physician retired from CIA, and an expert on the unorthodox application of medical and chemical knowledge. I took retired to be in quotes. There you go. Since that is a standard technique, and Hunt introduced me under my operational alias, George Leonard. We lunched at the below ground level restaurant at the Hay Adams Hotel in Lafayette Park. And their plan is to kill this columnist, Jack Anderson, who has been talking about the Pentagon Papers, et cetera, and is a real thorn in the side of Nixon. And they're both talking, what should we do? And then Liddy says, let's just eliminate him. Let's kill him. And then they go, oh, shoot. Oh, good. You were thinking the same thing. Okay, us too. And then Hunt wants to use LSD, and the guy and Dr. Gunn says, no, man, that's no good. Let's not LSD on what you think, acid on what you think. Because Hunt's like, hey, why don't you just put it on the steering wheel of his car? And the guy's like, man, look, first of all, the guy might be wearing gloves. It's wintertime. Second of all, it can be absorbed through the skin, but not necessarily. And third of all, it's not what you think it is. It's not going to do what you think it does. We need something different, like actual poison. Let's see. With an embassy on page 288, with an embassy safe, for example, is to be penetrated so that crypto material may be photographed for use by NSA. Everyone who might have access to the office is followed while the penetration is in progress. It is not begun unless a wiretap or other positive means has established that the embassy personnel will be away for a sufficient period. Should someone return unexpectedly, however, he would never get into the embassy door. He would be assaulted, his wallet and watch removed, and while he was unconscious as the latest victim of the outrageously high rate of street crime in Washington, which is not within the jurisdiction of and therefore not the fault of the FBI, the entry team would make good its escape. So this is, again, he's describing what happens as a precaution when somebody's returning in the middle of a safe cracking or a break-in. And later he gets Frank Sturgis and one of the other Cubans to handle this. He says, on page 289, we get something sort of quasi-philosophical from Liddy. And he says, I believe in individual responsibility, free will, and the rule of reason. There is a point beyond which I will not go, and that is anything my conscience tell me is malum in se, evil in and of itself, or my judgment tells me is irrational. I have no problem with doing something that is malum prohibitum, wrong only because of the existence of a law prohibiting it. He gives an example of malum in se, something evil in and of itself, which you can imagine would be the example you would use, especially when talking about CIA guys, because they do this. But then he says the example of malum prohibitum, on the other hand, would be the statute prohibiting driving through a stop sign without coming to a complete halt. Absent such a law, to do so would be a morally indifferent act. So there's his justification. I mean, say what you will about, his own philosophical beliefs and his own misguided logic in reference to free will and right versus wrong, which is later in the book. You can't deny the fact that from this guy's point of view, right? This is why we're reading this, that he lives by a certain code and is a true believer in this stuff. And that's why he does it. That's also why he was convicted and never talked. At least that's the story that he tells. I mean, who knows what the true story is, but I tend to believe his own story. Then he goes on to talk about this guy, McCord. And McCord is that's their mistake because one of the guys one of the Cubans has to go because they can't keep him on for so long, and then they get this guy McCord as their electronics engineer for their operation. He's the one who's going to install the wiretaps, but it's a huge mistake. It's a fatal mistake because McCord starts off just like consulting and advising them, but then they take him along on the actual Watergate break-in. And did you know, by the way, again, another thing most people don't know about Watergate, the actual Watergate break-in, the singular is not a singular event. They went in and out of Watergate, the Watergate Hotel, a number of times, and that's why they got caught. And McCord is really the linchpin in their fatality, so to speak, because McCord is a former FBI and current CIA um, asset or operative. So when they get caught and McCord gets caught, it's only a matter of time before it comes to light who he is. I mean, his fingerprints are on file, and then that comes to light, and then that's what connects the Nixon administration to these guys. And interestingly, um, you know, one of the things about Howard Hunt is that Howard Hunt, ends up cooperating with the government and telling all, right, in relation to Watergate. And obviously, CIA doesn't like that. And did you know that Howard Hunt's wife, Dorothy, was also a CIA? Um, I don't know, not an agent, but she worked in the Spanish embassy, and she was a liaison with CIA. And do you know what happened to Howard Hunt's wife? Do you guys know this? Well, she got on a plane in Chicago with a bag full of money and documents. The plane just happened to have a bunch of other um, government or intelligence people on the plane, and the plane just happened to uh, BLOWUP after takeoff. And that was right after the Watergate hearings. And I would say, it's obvious to us, we could say that that would be a retaliation or a message for his own activities, right? At least that's what it seems on the surface, or beneath the surface, rather. Um, let's see. So then they get their actual Watergate mission, which is to they've already broken in. They broke into Ellsberg's offices. They broke into the psychiatrist's office, etc. And they made it look like they made that one. The cover for that one was they broke a window and then they scattered like pills everywhere on the ground to make it look like some schizoid or junkie or something broke into the offices and was just like rifling through stuff looking for drugs. But they came away with they wiretapped or whatever, came away with documents. But then the Watergate Hotel, the purpose was they're told at the last minute by this guy McGruber who works for Nixon. He says, just get it done. And Liddy, they all automatically have a problem with this because it's a change in their operations. They haven't really planned it to do that. And Howard Hunt's like, we got to back out of this. This is no good. But they have to go into Watergate and they have to wiretap it. And then then they come back out. And then if they find out that this is expensive equipment that they put in place is blocked by a steel beam, which is not transmitting the wiretaps. So they have to go back in and redo the wiretaps. Then they have to go back in again and they have to photograph all of the files. And that's when they got caught. They went in and the lookouts who were Liddy and Hunt that were posted see the guards on the 8th floor, and then they go down like to the 6th floor, and then they say we're caught. And they caught him because the Cubans had to take such a long time to photograph everything. And Hunt's like, we can't do this to them. And they go in, but they're like, let's do it. Fuck it. Let's do it anyway. And they go in and they photograph all the stuff. But the way they got caught, you probably know this, but it's interesting if you don't know it, or it's just a reminder. The way they got caught was they made their entry through the parking garage and they taped the locks on the doors so that they wouldn't have to keep opening and closing the locks. And Liddy is like, that's an old, mechanic's trick, an old electrician's trick. Like, so they won't have to do it. And the way they do it, like they don't tape it like lengthwise. So like they have the door opens and there's the lock, and they don't tape it lengthwise to cover it. And because because then it would be automatically suspicious. They tape it so that the tape is on the outside and the inside of the door, obviously, to make it look like an electrician did it. But when they go in, they do that, then they go back out. When they go back in to make their re-entry, the tape's been removed. So they're like, Hunt's like, we gotta go. We're not gonna do this mission. But they decide like, oh no, we can still do it. But that was their mistake because when they did that and then they retaped it, and McCord was supposed to not retape it, but he retaped it again. And then when the guard came back down and saw the tape had been reapplied, they knew there was a security breach. So then they called the cops, and then that's when they got caught. So it was an operational breach. So then in the rest of the book, basically what happens is they get caught, and Liddy tells them, no matter what happens, he's responsible. He takes responsibility, and he goes home and he says to his wife, like, okay, I'm probably going to jail. And he knows that the Cubans won't talk. He's pretty sure Hunt won't talk, but McCord is acting weird. McCord talks, and then Liddy has the longest prison term because he refuses outright to cooperate with the government. He won't talk. He won't snitch on anybody. And he gets the longest sentence. Hunt ends up turning, snitching or whatever. And then as proof, one of the interesting things about this book that anybody who's read this will remember, as proof, one of the things that Liddy does throughout is when he's young, he when he's confronting his fears, he does this thing where he holds a lighter under his arm to see how long he can go without flinching. And he basically trains himself that, like, using his will, right, he can overcome fear and pain. And he does it a number of times in the book as a proof to anybody who thinks that he's not what he says he is. And he has him hold out a lighter. He does it when he's in prison. He has a guy hold out a lighter, and it singes all the skin off of his arm down to his bone. And then let's see. He tells, hold on, let me just check something real quick. He tells the guys in charge at the White House, he says, look, I know this opens me up to retaliation because you think that I'm going to snitch and the president's going to get in trouble. But so he's worried that, a hit squad will take him out and it'll be messy and we'll get his family. So instead he says, just tell me what corner to stand on and I'll be there and you can kill me. And apparently he means it. And it's crazy because they all think that he's like, they're like, oh, well, why are you taking all this security, stuff so seriously? And then it turns out to happen. Right. Page, let's see, 352. John Dean said something he later claimed he did not say. That goes without saying. Everyone will be taken care of. In other words, he'll take care of all of the people, all of the plumbers. He says, I would never talk, but he and those above him couldn't be absolutely sure of that, except one way. It occurred to me that people who would seriously consider the use of drugs against Ellsberg and the killing of Jack Anderson might well decide to go ahead with an assassination in my case. He says, page 353, so far as I knew, I was the only one readily available to the White House for a domestic sanctioned killing. And because he's put himself forth as a possible assassin, if they need anybody taken care of. He says they certainly couldn't turn to the CIA without handing Richard Helms, the key to the kingdom. Hunt was blown. What was left of them? I didn't mind being killed if that was thought necessary, but I didn't want some scared to death professional to try it at home or anywhere else where my family could be in danger. I had visions of shotgun blasts through the kitchen window on Sunday morning while we were at breakfast. Look, John, I said while I was captain of the ship, when she hit the reef, and I'm prepared to go down with it. If someone wants to shoot me, Dean's head snapped up and he stared at me. Just tell me what corner to stand on and I'll be there, okay? Then he goes through, like, basically page 376, I never saw Dorothy Hunt again. On December 10th, United Flight 533 crashed at Midway Airport, Chicago, carrying her to her death. He doesn't speculate on that or talk about it or what had happened, but we know. Let's see. He gets mad at the Hunts because it turns out that they were paying him. They were paying him for his lawyer's fees when they said they would take care of him. But it wasn't from the government or the administration. It was from the Hunts personally. And because of that, they assume that they can own him and that he will then go into a publishing deal with Howard Hunt and they'll sell. So he says Howard Hunt makes a number of times. He talks about how Hunt was like, would say things like, "Oh, how much did you skim off the top or whatever?" And he said, and he basically infers that like Hunt and the intelligence guys are doing that anyway, but he never will do it. Page 398, I told McCord he was right and that I knew very well that we wiretapped almost every foreign embassy in Washington, friend or foe, and in the case of some, such as the Soviet, take movies of everyone who goes in or out. I tried to point out to McCord that it was unrealistic for him to expect that the United States government would admit to such a practice. He was unbelieving. For all his exposure in the FBI and CIA to the way of the clandestine world, McCord actually believed that the United States government wouldn't lie. He even felt betrayed by his beloved CIA, he says. So it's interesting that, he's an operative for the government. And he's saying that he doesn't, he's essentially saying he doesn't lie and we're to take what he says as truth. But he also says that outright that he's not naive enough to think that they wouldn't lie because he knows that they will in any situation. Remember that came out in the church hearings. He actually mentions the church hearings. Remember in the church hearings, I think it was during the church hearings, Colby and Helms talked about how the CIA, even under oath, is not expected to keep their oath as long as it protects the agency. He said, okay, so he goes to prison, and what follows is like a long, really, really interesting and at times funny indictment of the U.S. prison system and how he gets along in prison. He gets along pretty well because he learns the ropes and the rules. He fights people. He proves his worth. He sues the prison system itself and becomes sort of a hero. Eventually, after Nixon resigns, and then Ford takes over and pardons some of the guys, and then Carter commutes his sentence, and then let's see. Then he does like an interview. He never talks, but he does do an interview where he talks about Bob Haldeman, John Ehrlichman, Charles Colson, John Dean, Magruder, and Howard Hunt and the burglars. They all sort of collaborate on this book called Silent Coup. I haven't read Silent Coup, but I probably need to. And it's it's a 1991 book on Watergate, and John Dean tries to sue him. John Dean turns out to be this tries to sue him for defamation, even though he's the one that approved the operations. The disclosure of payment of money to the entry team and the use of the CIA to thwart the FBI investigation. Anyway, then he goes on to talk about his life afterwards pretty briefly, which is that he becomes, he goes, I guess, I don't know if he goes back into law, if he can, but, he like writes an article for someone, not about Watergate, but then he makes some money. Then he becomes a radio talk show host. Then he goes on to be an actor, and he's in Miami Vice, and he played a villain in Miami Vice. That's why I had the profile pic. I mean, the picture there is the cover, because he played, if you remember Miami Vice or you've seen Miami Vice, he played Mr. Real Estate, and he's one of the only villains that got away. And the very last line, God and the American people have been very good to me, and I'm deeply grateful. And then he goes in to talk about his kids, and his kids are very impressive. They're all, athletes. His daughter was in the United States Army Nurse Corps Reserve. His other daughter's a working artist. His son, Jim, is a lieutenant in the SEALs. His other son is in the Marine Corps, and his other son is a U.S. Army Ranger. So, impressive. Yeah, pretty impressive. But anyway, and then he ends it, Deo Gratias. And of course, the subtitle, right? I sing of arms and the man, right? From the Aeneid. And of course, I got that because Liddy actually will end his letters to his lawyer with that phrase. And of course he is armed throughout. Much of it is spent on arms. And it's a story of a guy in clandestine operations, in government, as a black bag man and in wet works. And again, I think my thesis for this, right, was that this guy's a true believer, and that we get sort of an inside look at some of these events from a pretty straightforward perspective. Say what you will about that, but it's an interesting read. It's a fun read, and yeah, it was. This is a real page turner. G. Gordon Liddy's Will. Of course, he also went on to be a spokesman for Roslyn Capital. Buy gold. So, thank you to everybody. I appreciate y'all. Please make sure you smash that like. That you leave a comment for me underneath. As always, please share. And if you're watching this later, if you came along randomly to watch this, please hit that subscribe bell. Give me, continue to watch my streams and get me some more subs. You guys, please don't hesitate to share the channel because I think we're having fun here. And thank you again for Rachel for that $5 super chat. If anybody's got any questions or anything, please don't hesitate to put them at the bottom of the stream, in the comments section, or of course, like I said before, you can email me at madmaximalism@gmail.com, with 2 X's, madmaximalism with 2 X's at gmail.com, and give me some suggestions for things to cover. I don't know what we're going to be covering next. Probably Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. I guess we'll cover that. I mean, Jay wrote a really good, it's one of his best. Jay's analysis, our homeboy over there, one of his best analyses is his essay on Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, the Gnostic Elements of Blood Meridian. So I'm hesitant to do it, but maybe I'll do it anyway just because, it'll be fun. It's something different to cover. Other than that, I'm not sure what else I'm going to cover, but thank you guys. I really appreciate y'all coming here and being with me here on what day is this? What is this? Tuesday night. Thank you to everybody who stopped by. I saw my sister in there. Shout out to my sister who showed up in the chat. Love you, little sis. And thank you to Base Homeschool Mom. We look forward to things that I'm not going to say on here, but because they might be top secret, but we look forward to seeing our actual verified eCeleb alpha level Rachel Wilson Based Homeschool Mom author soon on some things. And please go to all my friends' pages and make sure that you like their streams and their pages. Appreciate you too, Crispy. Good night, Goose. Good night to everybody. Good night, Ellie. Thank you so much. Good night, everybody. Good night, Rasky. Appreciate y'all. And I will talk to y'all later. Have a good night. Hope that was fun, you guys. Peace.